Hello and welcome in the next lesson of our Soviet School of Chess. If you watched the previous video, we were talking about time and how insufficient time can restrict pieces' mobility. And then we introduced the concept of forcing moves. These are the moves which force your opponent to react. You force your opponent to play with certain pieces. And in this way, you are restricting his other options. So when you play a forcing move, he has to react to the forcing move, and he doesn't have time to move his other pieces. So we talked a little bit about this the last time, and now we will open the new chapter, rather subchapter, forcing moves, and the first forcing moves we'll talk about will be checks. So as you know, the check is the most forcing moves because you are required by the rules of the chess game, you are required to get out of the check. There are three ways when you are checked in which you can get out of the check. First way is just to move your king out of the check. The second way is to block the check with some other piece. And the third way is just to capture the piece which delivers check. And the most forcing moves are so-called double checks. So when you give this cover check and at the same time you give check with another piece. So if the two pieces are delivering check to the king, then there is only one option and you have to move the king. So these are the most forcing chess moves. And now let's see a few examples how this could be applied in the real games. So in this first position, this is from the mate with two bishops. Now the king doesn't want to go in the corner. So in order to mate the king, you have to force king into the corner. And how can you do this in this position? Well, simply by delivering check on bishop to e6. And now king has to move. The only legal move is to go to h8, and then another bishop delivers checkmate. So this is a very simple example in which you can see how by delivering check, you can force your opponent to do something he doesn't want to do. Namely, here he doesn't want to go to the corner, but well, he must. And after he goes in the corner, he gets checkmated. A second, also simple example is the mate with knight and the bishop. And to make it more interesting, there is even a rook here. So it's not pure bishop and knight mate, but also there is another piece. But it doesn't help black, so like previously, if you want to checkmate the king has to go in the corner. King doesn't want to go to the corner, so as long as king is not in the corner, he cannot be checkmated. So black would, in theory, he could play, some moves with his rook, and thus avoid going in the corner. But after knight to f6 check, you are forcing your opponent to play the only legal move, and the only legal move is king to h8, and then bishop to g7 again delivers checkmate. So again, a simple example which shows you how check can force your opponent to do something he doesn't want to do. Let's now see one example from the real game. So this is the position. If you want, you can pause the video to try to find a solution of your own. Actually, this position is mate in 3. So just by sequence of checks brings black in the position in which he will be very soon checkmated. So as a general advice and general rules of thumb, when the position is very open and very sharp, you need to always to look for checks first. So for example, here you see that he has doubled rooks. The position is completely open. There are no pawns in the center. So everything is open here. His knight is very close to your king from several directions. His rooks are very active. So everything is active, everything is sharp, and I mean, anything can happen from these kind of positions. So if it's your turn, you need to check for the checks first. So because any waste of time in this kind of position can be lethal for you and for your opponent. So here you want to play the most forcing move, and this is check. So rook to d6 check. And now what can black do? Well, he can either move the king or block the check. If black decides to block the check with king to e8, then rook just takes the knight and delivers checkmate. So this doesn't work. So the king has to move. Where can king move? I mean, all these squares are taken. So the only legal move is actually to take the rook. So white is sacrificing a rook. But now again the check. So knight f7 check. King has to go to f5, only legal move, and now g4 delivers beautiful checkmate. So this is just example how in these kind of positions in which time is crucial, so whoever has the tempo, whoever has the initiative will most likely win the game, you need to look for the most forcing moves, and most forcing moves are checks. Even if it means, you could think like, well, but if I deliver check, I will lose the rook, and then stop calculating there. But it's a bad practice of calculation, so you need to calculate as long as there are any forcing moves. This is a very important rule of calculation. So if you calculate from here, so rook to d6, check, and then you see that that you are losing the rook, and don't just stop and dismiss the idea, oh, this loses a rook, but look for another checks. Can I deliver another check? And then if you go here and see that you can actually deliver another check with knight to f7, well, then he has only one legal move, and this is to go to f5, and then you can see, can I check here? Yes, I can with g4, and this is checkmate. So you should be able to calculate this sequence, because it's only 2.5 moves deep, and all moves are forcing moves, and all responses from the black are forced responses. So this is a very nice example of the position which requires calculation, and in which the calculation is not so difficult because of the presence of forcing moves. Let's now switch to another example. So here, this is an example how forcing move can give you a valuable tempo. So for example, in this position, if you can see, the rook hits both pieces, and there is no way to defend both pieces. So if you go with king, for example, here to defend the knight, he will take the bishop. If you try to defend bishop with the knight, for example, play knight e3, protecting the bishop, he can just take the knight. If you try to protect knight with the bishop, if you go here or here, he'll just take the bishop. So there is no way to protect both of these pieces simultaneously. And this would mean that, one piece just drops off. But luckily, if you have check, if you have a forcing move, then you can, it's almost like you're allowed to play 2 times in a row, like you're allowed 2 moves in a row. So here, the solution of this problem is just bishop to a6, so moving the bishop from the attack, and also delivering check. And after king moves, well, now you can just protect your knight, for example, with the king to b2, and everything is secure, and white is winning this endgame. Okay, let's go to the next position. This position is a very famous mating pattern, in which white delivers checkmate by sacrificing the rook and just playing, forcing moves, delivering checks. Otherwise, if there were no forcing moves here, I think, white will be doomed completely, because his king is unsafe, he's a rook down, so black is a rook up, black has a very strong check, and if it was black turns to move, this game will be over in just a few moves. But here it's white's turn to move, and black will not have time to achieve any of his threats, because white can strike with a check, rook to h1, check, king has to go to g8, only legal move, and then rook to h8, again check, the only legal move is to take the rook, and then queen to h1, again check, the only legal move is rook g8, and then queen delivers checkmate on h7. So this shows you, if you have the initiative, if you have forcing moves on your disposal, it doesn't matter how bad your position is and how low in material you are. If you have a good sequence of forcing moves, you can do wonders over the board. Okay, let's now look one example from the real game. This is very interesting game. This was actually played in 1947 Tallinn Championship. You see there are 4 queens on the board, and the position is obviously very sharp. It's white's turn to move, and if you assess this position, you can see that black is better. So black is 2 pawns up. First of all, black's king is safe, while white king is completely exposed. So this means that, okay, here the queen is hanging, but even if it was not so, I mean, there is this check, which I believe is a checkmate. I mean, there are many forcing moves which black can do here and harm the exposed king. So what does white want to do? Well, white is hoping to draw here, because if he ever gives the initiative to the black, he will just be crushed. So this means that white needs to keep the strongest initiative possible, and this is by delivering checks. So what is the strategy here of white? Well, if you notice, this king cannot move, so this king is stalemated, and this pawn is also immovable. So if white could somehow get rid of these three pieces, well, then his king and his pawn will be stalemated, and it will be a draw. So white is fighting for a draw here. With this is what is called a fighting draw. So it's not, boring draw in which nobody does anything and then they just agree to draw. But this is a fighting, very instructive and very creative draw. So white begins with sacrificing the first queen. So queen to h8 check. King has to take the queen. Rook to c8 check. King has to go to g7. Queen to e5 check. And now black has to block with the rook, otherwise if he blocks with the pawn he'll be checkmated. So blocking with the rook. And now rook to g8, sacrificing the queen. And now rook to g8 check, sacrificing the rook. King takes rook. And now queen e8 check, king g8. And now queen h8, sacrificing the queen. And after this, it's a stalemate. So white manages to force the stalemate just with forcing moves. And again, this is a 6-move deep calculation, but it's not very difficult because all the moves are forcing moves. So if you can visualize from here, this is check, black has to take, check, black has to go here, check, black has to block with the rook, check, black has to take the rook, check, black has to go to g7, and finally here on h8 check, and black has to take the queen. So although this is a 6-move or 12-ply deep calculation, it's easy to perform because all the moves are checks and all the responses by black are forced responses. Okay, let's look at the next example. This is one study from 1930, and it's white's turn to move. And you can see that, well, here black has 2 pawns, white has only 1 pawn, so after promotion black will have 2 pawns and white will have 0 pawns, so the black should be winning here. But unfortunately white has on disposal a large number of forcing moves, and this will allow white actually to win the game. So the sequence begins with the first forcing move, the first check, so promoting to the queen. And now the only way black can stop and get out of the check is to block with the queen. And now white must keep the initiative with checks, otherwise he'll just lose the game because black has 2 pawns. So queen to a2 check, king to h8. And now you can see this very interesting pattern. So what does white want to do? White wants to get his queen close to the king and then deliver checkmate. Or, maybe do some perpetual check or something. Whatever it is, white has to bring the queen closer. And he does it by a series of checks, and it is like going to the staircase. So he gives the check on b2, king has to go here, and now he's just climbing the staircase with check, 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 king goes here, check, goes here, check, king goes here. Okay. And now in this position there is a striking blow, and this is queen to d7, and now white is threatening checkmate on h7 if nothing happens, and if queen moves then just checkmate will be delivered on g7. So this is unstoppable mate. The only way to stop the mate in one is maybe to play some desperado moves, giving up the queen and so on. So this is just game over. And it's very interesting. If you can go back, we can go a little bit quickly. So how did white achieve this? Just by delivering checks, he brought the queen in the square in which he can just win the game. So it was like here, and then queen. Just look at the queen, how the queen goes up to the staircase, and now at this moment the final blow. Okay, let's see another study. It's from 1990. A very interesting study, fun exercise. So this is the position, and now it's white's turn to move. And in fact, this study demonstrates the importance of the double check. So white will just continuously give double checks, which will disallow black to capture the piece, and king will have to just move on until the end of the board. So the king will eventually go to the corner of the board, and he will be checkmated. So it goes like here. So check, king moves, and now just rook will just climb the stairs here, because it will be double check. So this is a double check, and double check means that black will never be able to capture any of white's pieces. So black goes here, check, check. All of these checks are double checks, and the rook is protected. Goes here, check, 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 check. King has to go here, check. King has to go here, and now check. And now again, rook cannot be captured because it's again a double check. So king has to go to the corner, and then check, mate. So this is a fun exercise, but it shows how strong the double check is. You just cannot do anything. You just have to move your king around, and it gives a very strong initiative to the person who has the opportunity to double check. And for the last example, let's go to the one real game situation. Again, you can pause the video if you like, if you want to try to solve this for yourself. So it's white's turn to move, and white is winning. So this position is in fact very similar to the fun exercise we just solved, because you can see that these two bishops are very well coordinated, and this can allow rook, like in the previous exercise, just to make a stairs. So the rook is again making a stairs. So the first move is rook takes knight, and now you can see that the queen is hanging, so this is actually queen sacrifice, and black here took the queen, but now combination of these two bishops and the double checks will just end with a forced checkmate. So first rook to g6 double check, so you can see the rook is protected, and the king is checked twice, so king has to go here, and now rook to g7 again double check, king has to go to h8, rook to h7 again double check, king has to go here, and then it's just a checkmate. So you can see how this fun exercise we just did before, which is obviously artificially composed, is actually something which presents a pattern which can be used in the real games, and this is the example of the game played in Paris in 1922, in which this exact pattern was used to first sacrifice the queen and then deliver the checkmate. And with this, we are concluding our lesson for today. We will still be talking about forcing moves in the next lessons. I hope you enjoyed the lesson, and stay tuned. I will see you soon in the next chapters. Cheers.